You don't know what I'm going to say, do you? No, first of all, I'm carrying on with what I was doing from the beginning of this retreat in the mornings about the meditation practice. And yesterday I talked about the jhanas, not really describing what they feel like that much, but just especially saying how important they are and how a person can recognize those jhanas actually happen. And just, I always like to make sure that the practice of meditation and the Dhamma taught by the Buddha are actually always coalesce, because I've found sometimes people do one type of meditation, use some practices for meditation, and then other things for the understanding of Dhamma. And one thing is like the force which one uses. Remember, that was the first teaching the Buddha said, to make sure that it's in between, actually it avoids the extremes of asceticism and indulgence. And I've seen that in my own life, especially with some of the monks which I grew up with. A good example of that was one monk. He wasn't a forest monk, but he was living in UK many years ago, and he read about the Buddha saying that he could actually live in India and just with his 3 robes be able to just use the 3 robes and be able to even go out in the snowy nights or the really cold nights in India and would not be affected. He could tolerate the cold with just the 3 robes. So this monk decided to go out on Hampstead Heath in the winter, around now, just with his 3 robes, to practice his endurance. It's only cold, it's only a perception. He survived. He managed to last until the morning, and then he had to go to hospital with double pneumonia. There's another monk, I won't say who he is, some of you may know him even, but he decided, not me, he decided to sit all night without moving. So he crossed his legs, made himself as comfortable as possible, and resolved he's not going to move until the morning time. And he didn't. He lasted all night, then had to go to hospital for a double knee reconstruction. Now there's something there which people often feel that their willpower is going to push them through to deep meditation, insights and enlightenment. But the path is not like that. It's not how much willpower you have, but as I mentioned many times, how much wisdom power, how much insight you have, and how to actually meditate, how to get deep. And that's one of the things I've been trying to teach here, is to lead you into feel what it's like that when the 5 hindrances disappear. And again, those 5 hindrances: wanting, not wanting, sloth and torpor, restlessness, remorse, and lastly doubt, especially that first one, wanting. And I mentioned many times, if you're meditating and you get, say like even a nimitta, get close to a jhana, wow, I'm really close, and you want it, it never works. The whole meditation disintegrates. Wanting is never a path into stillness. It's also one of the reasons why I emphasize the meaning of samadhi is not concentration. Wanting can lead you to concentration, but stillness leads you to peace. Sorry, I got that the wrong way around. like wisdom leads you to stillness. It's a hard thing to understand what stillness is, to experience it and maintain it. But once we can do that, then kind of the pathways are open for us. Insight and stillness always will have to go together. Once you have that insight, you know what stillness is, and you know how it's experienced. And many times there are obstacles, to stillness. And one way of overcoming those obstacles is using what we call insight. You see deeply into something so you know what the problems are. And a good example of that is many times when I was meditating, you get kind of close to stillness, close to really amazing states of mind, but it doesn't work, it doesn't get through. One of the insights which I've often used is like realizing how powerful an obstacle wanting is, even wanting good things. So, you're there and you're seeing this beautiful nimitta, and you know that can lead right into the jhanas. But why? Can you not let it happen? I say let it happen because that's giving the answer already. Because I wanted something. Even you wanted good things. Nevertheless, that wanting is a disturbance of the mind which stops the stillness happening. And that's why when you can see what the problem is, you can always tell people the only way to get the water perfectly still is to put it down, leave it alone. Or Ajahn Chah's simile, he would actually often, he didn't have any visual aids to use, he just gave talks, but every now and again he'd look at the scenery around his hut, around in the forest. He said, see those leaves on the trees? I'm looking at the leaves on the trees, in this wisdom park. None of them are moving. They're still. Oh, and I can see a few moving in the background. Why are they moving? The wind is blowing. How can I get those leaves on the trees to be perfectly still? Should I hold them still? That won't work. Even if you hold it still, it moves. If you can protect it from the wind, so there's no wind blowing at all, then every leaf in this forest will still be moving less and less and less until eventually it becomes perfectly still. As Ajahn Chah would say, that's its default state. The nature of the leaves is to be still if nothing is moving it. And he also added that's the nature of the human mind, of you, to be still. There's only something external is making it move. And what is that? Wanting. Even wanting good things, let alone bad things. If your mind is still, can you not leave it alone? It takes time, but soon that mind becomes perfectly still. And there was a simile of that, which is in most traditions, but the last time I heard this simile was when I was giving some talks over in South Korea. And this talk was one of their meditation masters, a Mahayana monk from the Jogje tradition. And even though these are Mahayana monks in the Jogje tradition, they are so similar in their practice, to forest monks. A lot of times I've invited them over to spend a range retreat over in Bodhinyana Monastery. And we've gone over to give talks at their monasteries in South Korea. It's so easy to get on with because we're basically practicing the same thing. But anyhow, and this particular monk, gave a story which I've given myself many times, that if you want to see the best image of the full moon, you have to walk up into the mountains and find a still forest pool, again, still forest pool. And if there is no wind, you look at that lake, that pool, and the surface becomes like glass, like a mirror. And then if the full moon is up in the sky, you can see a perfect image of that moon. If there is any waves or even ripples in that lake, it distorts the image of the moon. The full moon can only be seen properly when everything is still. And that's an old simile which has been around for centuries, which you can really admire. If you want to have insight, to even like see a full moon as it really is, the lake has to be still. And that's actually what happens. You see deeply into things, which is one of the reasons why that even in Anapanasati, once the jhanas have been experienced and you come out afterwards, what do you do next? People often ask that. And it's quite clear, what would happen next. If any of you had experienced a jhana, a real one, powerful, bliss, and something like you've never experienced before, what would happen? You would ask, my goodness, what was that? I don't know anybody who had experienced something so otherworldly, so powerful, who would not have a look at it and figure out what it was. The wonderful thing about those deep meditations, because they're experienced in pure mindfulness, in other words, your awareness is without any hindrances, and it is also still pure. You have nothing to disturb or distort the image. You remember it so easily. The other places where you can remember images are ones which are very frightening and scaring, like a car crash or like falling off a cliff or something. I don't know if you've ever had those experiences where your life has been threatened or you thought it was threatened. I remember just as a young 18-year-old going on holiday by myself over in Scotland. It was kind of weird, but even though, I was healthy, I always liked to go on holidays, vacations alone, walking in the mountains. And I had a tent, and I knew how to look after myself and go alone and enjoy the solitude of the mountains. Weird as a young man, but that's what I did. I never realized I was going to become a monk, but you could see the tendencies for solitude and enjoying peace more than anything else. So when I did go into those mountains, one day I was walking on along the mountains in northern Scotland, and I missed the path. And because I missed the path, I took another step on this, what I thought was a path. It looked like a path, but it was had eroded, and I was just stepping on grass with nothing underneath it. And I fell down a cliff. And because I had a heavy backpack on, not like the backpacks people have these days, this was in 1969 or something, or 1970, and it twisted around, and I saw the cliff right in front of me, going. And I thought, I'm going to die. And many people say this, and it was true, that the life which I had that far was flashing in front of me, and to think you were going to die. Okay, it was only 18 years, but, that's a bit of a life. And then I felt solid earth underneath my feet, bent my legs, took the fall, rolled over, and I was alive. I think the only thing which had happened, I think one of the nails had been ripped off my toe or something. It was very painful, but at least I'd survived. And then I checked and there's no other wounds anywhere. And no bones broken. Incredible. And then I looked up and saw that the cliff was only about 2.5 meters high. And that's why I survived. But at the time, the whole time was distorted. Down, 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 down. It really thought like it was 20 meters or 30 meters. So because of that, it was an example of what happens, how your mindfulness and awareness can get distorted to the power of what you're experiencing. And that's what happens in deep meditation. You see really carefully, very clearly. And your memory of that is almost like photographic. You don't need to take notes in those deep meditations. The only word we have for that in English is like trauma. If you're in a car accident, if you've ever been in a car accident, it's like things go slowly. You can remember everything clearly. It's like because of the fear of death in your body says, let's get everything working 100%. That means that your mindfulness gets incredibly strong and your memory is strong too. So all those deep meditations you have, you don't need to actually think I better take notes. I'll forget this. No way. It's incredibly clear. More clear than anything else. It's like a traumatic event for your mind. Only the word trauma in English is always for negative experiences, and these are totally positive. So you can remember it. So what happens is once you emerge from those deep meditations, that is when you start to analyze them. But don't analyze them with words. I prefer the term to explore it. They're interesting experiences, so let's explore it. And in Anapanasati, you have those 4 explorations, you might call it, in the 13th, 14th, 15th, and 16th stage of Anapanasati. First of all, you explore anicca. What does that really mean? Straight away, you might say rise and fall. Of course, it's much more than that. That's one of the problems. When we don't have the full insight yet, we interpret it with the insight which you read in books, which is kind of superficial. One of the wonderful meanings of anicca, it actually came from when I learned my Pali, and also because I did Latin at school, I had a good brain, so Latin and Pali are not that different, they have the same structure. And so when I learned Pali and started reading, first of all the Vinaya, the monks' rules in Pali, then that was kind of eye-opening. There's so many understandings which I got from that. Instead of reading it entirely in English translation, you read it in as original as you could possibly get. And one of the things we saw there in the Pali Vinaya was different types of foods allowable for monks. And they had, what's called Sangha butter, food for the Sangha. And one of those which was allowable was called Nicca food, Nicca butter, Nicca in English. What that was sometimes if there is a monastery, that someone or some family will offer food every Wednesday or every Thursday. It's Thursday today. I know for sure that in Bodhinyana Monastery, certain families will be offering food to the community there. It's a big community of monks, so they need many people to offer the food. And a couple of families have been offering food every Thursday for years. That is called Nietzsche butter. And sometimes it happens that because it's a big festival or someone is sick or maybe their birthday, and they come on a different day, and it often has confused me. So what are you coming today for? It's not Thursday today, is it? I said, no, it's Tuesday, but it's our mum's birthday. So we decided to come on Tuesday today, but usually it's Thursdays. That's a Nietzsche butter. Something which was constant, reliable, always happens on that day. That's Nietzsche, reliable. Anicca means unreliable. Something was always there, has now gone missing. Remember that simile I gave yesterday about the tadpole becoming a frog? Once water has gone missing, that's mind-blowing. A fish, the thing with a fish, if a fish goes out of the water, that's it, it's dead. But for a frog, you go out of the water and you can go back into the water again and say, no, now I understand what this water is. It's not always there. It's anicca. Now all those things that you think you are, many of those things have never disappeared. So you assume that must be me. It's constant, permanent. But then it disappears in these deep meditations. And you have the opportunity to actually just see they're not really necessary. I'm going to linger on this point because it's usual when people have these deep meditations, they try and figure out what it was. And they try and figure out what it was by what they're experiencing there. What bliss was there? What type of bliss? Things like how long it lasts or what time meant for them. Even the idea of time. I mentioned this, but your experience of time, your understanding of time. What happens if time really distorts, as it does in things like jhana? Then your perception of time becomes different. Even, I remember this as even in the science classes, and I trusted the teachers I had, and they wouldn't lie, they tried to explain time as best they possibly could. And when they started saying, just simple, Einstein's general relativity, special relativity, that time can distort. You must have heard that before, that if we send Victor in a spacecraft traveling close to the speed of light, and he comes back, as far as Victor's concerned, it's only a couple of minutes have gone past. But then he looks to all the young people here, and you're more ancient than he is. He's only aged 2 minutes, you've aged 20 years. They say, that can't be, we're in the same universe. That's actually what happens, that time even distorts as well. It's not the same for everybody. In this particular case of getting into a deep meditation, when you come out of some of these deep meditations, you haven't got a clue how many days have passed by. That's why you have to ask somebody else. Even that little novice who said, when am I going to stop? And he stopped. And when he opened his eyes next time, he hadn't fallen asleep. He'd been perfectly blissed out, but almost like in a timeless state. And it was mid-morning, he missed his breakfast. And so these are the changing state of some of these things we think are constant. I should say something else about these deep meditations. Did I mention about the Indonesian monk?
Yeah.
I didn't mention totally about him, no, did I? He did become a monk after that. And I remember meeting him and discussing things with him. He's passed away now, which is why I can mention him, say more about him. He never knew how long he was sitting there in the jungle. But even afterwards, that he became a monk, and he was teaching in Wat Buwan in Thailand, teaching meditation. His English had improved a lot. And one of my friends, she was actually a Thai princess, and she was a rebel. She went to Chelsea Art College, where she met her husband, who went to the same school as I did. That's how we got to know each other. And so, even though she was a Thai princess, she was very rebellious, but eventually she became like a good Buddhist and started to meditate a lot. And one of the places she would go was to Wat Buwan, to this monk who was teaching a meditation class once a week. And she told me what happened there one day. If any of you ever want to see psychic powers, real ones, forget about it, please. Because she was meditating there, and this monk, who was powerful, she felt there was something strange happening during the meditation class. And so she opened her eyes. And what she saw, and she was one person, would not exaggerate, would not lie. She asked me, what the heck is going on afterwards? And because there was rays of light coming out of this monk's eyes, going into another meditator sitting there. Real laser eyes. And you think, wow, that'd be really cool to see that. In reality, it's not cool at all. She was so freaked out, so scared, that she got up and left and never went back again. And I've seen that happen so many times. So be careful. Thinking about it or watching it on some movie or something, yeah, that's fun. But when it's real, it's too powerful. So anyhow, what was I getting into that for? Oh yeah. When you have powerful states of mind, you can think of all the amazing sort of energy you have in the mind and what it can be done with it. But the most important thing to reflect upon, explore afterwards, is what's gone missing. Not what was there. In those states of deep meditation, yeah, you're blissed out, you feel you can do anything. But what's not there, which was usually there? That is where the great insights come from. Explore what has anicca, been there all the time, but now it's not there. You notice all the things. I'm going to take it down a notch now, before I take it up another few notches. That I remember my long life as being a monk and looking after the community around you. I remember this neighbour. This neighbour was a mayor and also a very powerful man in the area. And I remember we were building our main hall. I mentioned that Ajahn Ganha was there at the time, staying with us in Bodhinyana Monastery. Even he helped with some labouring for us. Actually just levelling the sand before we laid the concrete. But also the mayor came one day to check us out, and I saw him at a distance, and I also saw Ajahn Chah, who was much closer to him. Sorry, Ajahn Ganha. And I saw Ajahn Ganha walk straight up to the mayor. The mayor was an important person. He was also much more fat than I was. I am, sorry. But because he was the mayor, he was wearing a nice suit. And I was really concerned that the button, he only could put one button on his suit, and it was really tugging, it could pop off at any time. And I saw Ajahn Ganha walk right up to him, So what was he doing? Ajahn Ganha couldn't even speak English much. And so Ajahn Ganha smiled at the mayor and put his hand on his tummy and rubbed it. That's not how you treat a mayor. But as he was rubbing this mare's tummy, you could see the mare started giggling and gurgling. He loved every moment of that. And he used to tell me about it afterwards, what an amazing monk that was who could rub the mare's tummy. He also would pat snakes, that monk. He could pat anything. And anyway, from that day, the mayor became a very close friend. And he gave all the permissions, for what we needed to build. And not only that, but a few years later, when his wife got very sick, I tried to do as much chanting for her as possible. Eventually, his wife died. I remember him telling me, as a monk, you don't really get some of these understandings that easily. He said how difficult it was when you've been married to somebody for about 50 years, and then suddenly she's not there anymore. When things disappear. They were always there. And something always there. You get used to it, rely on it. When it vanishes, that's kind of tough. There's so many other things you are used to. It's very hard to contemplate that just with thinking or with logic. But when it actually happens, things you've had are gone. They've anicca. But a lot of times they don't anicca immediately. They don't just disappear. We have the other two parts of, the next two parts of the Anapanasati Sutta, like viraga and nirodha. Viraga is where it starts fading away. I know that some people translate that as dispassion, but the real translation, you can look it up in the books if you wish, is fading away. Things disappear, which you've relied on, and eventually nirodha, cease. And in the meditation, that's what you're experiencing. You're experiencing things ceasing, such as your thoughts. Can you stop thinking for a long time? Really stop. People sometimes say, Ajahn Brahm, you're demeaning the Dhamma by telling funny stories and jokes. No, there are funny stories in the Tipitaka. One of my favorites was when one of the Buddha's chief disciples, layperson, is called Chitta the General. He was a general, householder. Eventually, like many of the great disciples who were householders, he became a non-returner. But anyway, Chitta the householder was just walking, close to in Rajagaha. In there was another senior religious leader, Mahavira. He was Nigantanataputta, the head of the Jains. And I'm not sure, I never really verified this, but many scholars say the Jains were even more popular than the Buddha in the early times of the Buddha. Certainly they were very influential. And so he wandered into a meeting where Mahavira was talking to his close disciples. And they were talking about, this idea of thinking. And they asked Chitta, the leader of the Jains, the general who was disciple of the Buddha, and said, sometimes people say you can stop all thinking. Do you believe that, Chitta? And Chitta said, no, I don't believe that at all. And Nataputta smiled. You see, he is a senior disciple of Siddhartha Gautama, I never called him the Buddha. a senior disciple of the ascetic Gautama, and still he knows that you can't stop thinking. It's just like putting your fist in the Ganges River to stop the current. It can't be done, and he admits that. You just said that, haven't you? Yes, I said that I don't believe that, because I know it's true, because I do the jhanas myself. And then the leader of the Jain says, these disciples of the Buddha are so sneaky and difficult to talk with. But I always remembered that little story in the Chitta Samyutta, simply because it showed that one of the most senior practitioners of religion in that time, who wasn't a Buddhist, could not comprehend or understand or accept that thinking could be stopped and the jhanas existed. It was a discovery of the Buddha. You can't really say he discovered it, because it's always there for you. It's like discovering a path in the jungle which has been overgrown, and you clear it. But at that time, those first... Okay, I know what you're going to ask if you could put your hand up. What about the Buddha's first two teachers, Alara Kalama and Uttaka Ramaputta? Didn't they do jhanas? No. What they taught was, I'll just say it in English, the state of neither perception or non-perception, the state of nothingness. And they are usually dependent on the fourth jhana. You do the four jhanas first before you can enter those states. And there was no mention of the jhanas by those two teachers. And also when the Buddha started to reflect on jhanas, it was the jhana he had done under the rose apple tree, nothing else. We've talked about that and discussed that many times amongst monks. We come to the conclusion that what the Buddha was taught by those two was that name, the state of nothingness, the state of neither perception or non-perception, but it wasn't the real thing. It couldn't have been. If it was, the Buddha was being totally inconsistent when he said that those two things which he learnt under those two teachers were not conducive to full enlightenment, where elsewhere, especially the state of nothingness, is conducive. Has to be. So anyway, I've written articles about that. It's pretty much accepted. If you take it on face value, yeah, they taught jhanas. They didn't teach jhanas. They taught arupa states, which weren't real. So anyhow, when you go... Where's I'm going with this one anyway? When you go into things vanishing and disappearing, that is kind of scary for you. Even I have mentioned before that some people, when their first parts of their body start to vanish, what's going on? I can't feel my hands anymore. It's not as if your hands have gone numb. You know, you try to feel, you can feel the rest of the body, but you can't feel your hands anymore. It's just some sickness you're experiencing. Notice your sense of touch is turning off. I think I did mention to you earlier about going to a Zen retreat in north of England, having to watch a white wall, you know, with many other monks in line, lay people in line. And as I was watching that wall, eyes open, the wall vanished. It disappeared. A lot of Buddhism is like learning how to let things vanish and disappear, so you can understand what they really are. When you do understand what they really are, you see their full nature, and they're not worth holding on to. They cease. They're the nature to cease. So what about you? What things do you like holding on to? Sorry? Your partner?
A lot of things.
A lot of things.
Yeah.
When you see the subject disappearing, and what it's like when they're disappearing, why do people, I've mentioned this similarly before, but I'm going to re-mention it, the prisoner inside jail, why are they afraid of freedom? Why do they would rather stay in jail than be free outside? We're always afraid of things we don't know, have never seen before. We don't really know what's going on. When things we used to vanish, we get scared. And it's very much the prisoner, similarly. After a few days outside, they feel, oh, this is actually not bad, being free. This is what happens in meditation. Once you see these things vanishing, you never assume these things are wonderful and a great asset to you. Thinking. Is that good? How many times you've had arguments, even in Wisdom Park, about what you're going to do, who's going to teach, how you're going to build, how you're going to manage to get permission for all of this. How many times you've got really clever people thinking this way and thinking that way, and they have big arguments. What about in politics? How many great thinkers are there? Where does it get them? Arguments. Can you have thinking without arguments? Who's right and who's wrong? Whenever there's an argument, how Ajahn would always say it, you're both wrong. It's just different ways of seeing different things. I remember there was this one little article once about two kids, and they were arguing over the number of the car parking bay where their mother had parked their car. And one kid said, it's in car parking bay number 6. Had a photograph of it. It's car parking bay number 6. They said, no, it's in car parking bay number 9. The solution. They were just looking at the number from different ways. One from the front, one from the back. Who was right? The argument was what was wrong. So this is the trouble with thinking. We come from different backgrounds, different experiences. We always think we're right. What happens when the thinking stops? When you see, you know, you don't try to put it into words. So a lot of times, and what is enlightenment? How many of you know what enlightenment is? If you knew, a lot of people would be out of here. No, we don't want to be enlightened. Crikey. Sometimes actually you wouldn't want to if you really did. Sometimes I say that coming on a meditation retreat is like getting on a bus and you don't really know what the destination is. Sometimes you see other people are fully enlightened. Sometimes people these days, they say they are, they certainly ain't. But nevertheless, you have a bit of confidence and faith. If you do become enlightened, it'll be fun, it'll be pleasant, a good thing to do. I'm saying this, now I know what I'm talking about, but are you sure you want to be enlightened? Are you? Do you really want to be enlightened?
Yes.
Remember, you just can't have any sex anymore. That's God. You can't have any wanting for this or for that anymore. Are you sure? You go. But that's actually where you get to experience these things. It's only through experience, not through thinking about them. That's the only time you can really have that confidence. This is something worthwhile. It's one of the reasons why I did mention, even I did mention that first jhana, Sambodhi Sukha, that's a great description of the Buddha, how you feel. It's a taste of enlightenment. That will encourage you to let go even more. A lot of things are vanishing and disappearing. And one of the other things, which are not just your body vanishing and disappearing, not just thinking vanishing and disappearing, but also the planning vanishing and disappearing. As I mentioned, the will, the choice, vanishing. To many that's scary. But once you stay in a state with no possibility of wanting, of asking for things, choosing things, perfectly still and peaceful. Once you've tasted that, that's one of the things which you experience, not you think about, you experience in the second jhana. It's the purity of stillness, of samadhi, because that willpower, that sankhara, has stopped. You know how many of you have contemplated dependent origination? Avijja paccaya sankhara. We mentioned even yesterday, what is avijja? Not ignorance, but delusion. What's sankhara? Do you really know it? How can you know sankhara until it's vanished? How can the tadpole know what water is until it becomes a frog and it totally goes? So this is where you get insight based on experience, strange experiences about willpower and choice, sankhara. That's one of the reasons why, if ever you've noticed that, in the teachings of the Buddha, he said, so few people in this world will ever understand things like sabba sankhara samatha, all sankharas samatha, not concentrating, all sankharas becoming still until they disappear. That's what you experience in the second jhana. For hours. Beautiful, peaceful. And when you come out afterwards, you can't forget that. And it's one of the most enjoyable things you've ever experienced. You think, shouldn't it be scary? You can't do anything. The opposite. It's not scary, it's such a relief. And just to emphasize a point, I was going to emphasize it earlier, that you're perfectly safe in these deep meditations. I'm just telling a couple of stories now because sometimes if I get too serious, I look at you and you say, oh. And so there was one monk, it happened to many of them. One monk in the time of the Buddha, he was off in the jungle meditating nice and peacefully, and a couple of villagers came by and they took one look at him and he wasn't breathing. And they looked at him and thought, oh my goodness, you can't dial the emergency number in the forest in the time of the Buddha, there's no telephones. So what do we do now? And so they were good Buddhists. They thought, if we leave the Venerable here, he's probably dead now, then we'll have to get eaten by the jungle animals. That's not a nice way to leave a monk. I hope if you saw me in the jungle here or in the Wisdom Park, you wouldn't just leave me under a tree to be eaten by, I don't know, the wild boar or something. They'd take one look at me at my size and they'd lick their lips. She's going to be good. there. Western food too. They were in the forest, so they got some wood, got a pyre together, put the venerable on top, and lit the wood to cremate him. Of course, they didn't know much chanting. Whatever chanting they did that chanting. Just remember, I said I did the funeral chanting when I was supposed to do the marriage chanting. Maybe done the marriage chanting for him, I don't know. But anyway, they gave some chanting to give him a respectful farewell. They were busy, so they went off collecting their mushrooms in the forest, whatever they were doing. This was a story told in the Suttas. And of course, I added a little bit here and there, but the essential parts is the truth of this story. And then you can imagine their surprise the following morning when that venerable, they recognized him, walked into their village for alms round. Not even his robes were charred. This is what happens when you get into deep meditations. You become invulnerable. You can't be harmed or hurt at all. And that's happened so many times. So please, if I do stop breathing, you say, oh my goodness, Ajahn Brahm's gone now. Don't take me to the funeral parlour, don't cremate me. If you do, you put me in the oven. And then a couple of hours later, the funeral attendants will open the door and I go, hi. You're kind of invulnerable. There was one gentleman, this is in Sri Lanka, and he had a natural ability to get into these jhanas. And the person who was leading this group, this disciple of mine, he was a doctor in the military in Sri Lanka. And so he was more interested in just the effects of meditation. So he did an experiment, which he got on video. I've seen a copy of the video. That he asked this gentleman, actually never asked him, they were meditating together, and then eventually this young Sri Lankan got into a jhana. And then the doctor got out his medical equipment and he just moved up his, like jumper, this meditating guy's jumper up, put some antiseptic, not anesthetic, no, antiseptic, yeah, no anesthetic, antiseptic on his arm, got out his scalpel and tried to do an incision on his arm. It was videoed. And the scalpel would not go in, no matter how hard he pressed. Kind of invulnerable. But then just to prove that it wasn't the fact that he wasn't pressing hard, or that the scalpel wasn't sharp, he took him out of the meditation, or he came out of the meditation, and he told this man what he had done. And the man said, oh, it doesn't matter, I trust you. He said, would you mind if I try it again, this time with your permission? He said, yeah, fine. So this guy got into deep meditation again. The doctor got out his medical equipment, disinfected the arm, got out his scalpel. This time, the scalpel went into the skin. He made an incision. And then he put a couple of stitches in there to close the wound and put in a bandage. And then when the guy came out of meditation, did you feel anything? He said, I don't feel anything. I feel it now. And when it's all videoed, it was kind of amazing just how meditation works. In deep meditation, you don't feel any pain. And without permission, you can't do any damage at all. Weird, but true. So, does anybody allow me to do that experiment today? Do you want to do that? But these are saying inside meditation into what is suffering, what is dukkha. Why is it those deep meditations, there's very little dukkha? You still have experience, that experience will eventually pass. You come back to this real body again. But nevertheless, you're getting a mind which is so strong. It knows what this world is like, the dukkha of the five senses. And you know the dukkha of the mind in these states hasn't disappeared yet, but a huge amount of dukkha has disappeared. And of course, just being attached to things of the five senses, to humans, family, and things, it's pretty difficult to stay attached to any of those when you have other experiences, like the deep meditations. It's one of the reasons why that people who go to deep meditations a lot will probably become the non-returners. Because in those deep meditation, there's no, like, and this world is like forms. We're so caught up with stuff and with forms, and what happens when things get stolen or get destroyed, or we lose them. Well, we don't value enough something else about the nature of the mind, and how free that can be, and how peaceful that can be. What actually is this mind? So in these deep meditations, you're experiencing what the mind is. You have these amazing states where things vanish. If you knew that they were going to vanish anyway, they're not sort of going to last, you wouldn't spend so much time on them. So I mentioned before, if only I'd have known I was going to become a monk, I wouldn't have spent so much time studying silly stuff like theoretical physics. All that sort of stuff is kind of interesting, but it's not really the subject of deep insight. So I'm just going to finish with one other little ordinary insights, but this is how deep insight works as well. When you have an experience, you want to figure out what the heck was that. This was one of the reasons why I gave a keynote address at a World Computer Conference over in Daejeon in South Korea. And the organizers said to me, business class tickets, and put me up in a 5-star hotel and treated me just so well. And they liked what I said because I think they gave a $2,000, $3,000 US donation to the monastery for about a 45-minute talk. One used to say in London, a good little earner for the monastery. But when they asked me, why am I there giving a keynote address at a computer conference? And I had these really big shots in computing were there. And I just held up something. I held up a bottle of water at that conference and said, what is this? What else? What else? What else? What else? The longer I asked, they were very compliant. They all gave their ideas. And I said, this is the path of innovation, otherwise known as insight. You've been taught when you were at school, carp, water, water, rainwater. You're seeing things deeper. Yes, I'm saying, okay, I've heard that, now what else do you see? The longer you look at things, the deeper you see. And sometimes if you take a glass of water and just keep looking, you see so many different things. At first you think you've exhausted it already, but no, you keep on looking. You see more and more and more, deeper and deeper and deeper. The problem with us is we're way too impatient. We cannot maintain our attention on anything that long. But with the deep meditations, sometimes you're watching this mind for hours, Imagine the insights you can get, the innovations you can get. I explained it well enough. They were really very happy. Because in business, isn't it important not just to keep working harder, but to get more innovations, new way of looking at things, new way of seeing things, to get closer and closer and closer to something which no one has ever seen before. Insight. So I like it when you can use some of these processes which we develop in monasticism to actually to use that even for business. How's business going in Malaysia? How can we get it deeper, more powerful, so you become more wealthy and manage to sponsor stage 2 of Wisdom Park, or phase 2, isn't it? Phase 2, yeah. Do you need the money? So come on, get into some insight, new ways of looking at things. And so that's a kind of an introduction to what insight is. The deeper your meditation, the more still you are, the more you understand. Thank you for listening.
Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.